What's going on, everyone? It's Hax. I'm putting together a comprehensive video for you guys that will basically recap a lot of the videos that I've put together over the course of the past year or so with regards to the ongoing controller legality discussion. Now, this will largely have to do with how I believe the community should approach GameCube controller plus box parity, but it'll also give a different perspective on the entire subject, which is that the GameCube controller is more so the problem, whereas the community kind of views the box as the problem here. I believe that the box is separate from the fact that many of these mechanical issues within the game actually stem from the GameCube controller itself, and so this will attempt to redirect the community in terms of the way that it thinks about the entire subject so that it can reach the appropriate solution to the ongoing problems. So unlike most of my videos, this is actually not a scripted video. What I've done is I've put together a bunch of slides, and I think this will let me articulate my thoughts better because I want to provide commentary as we go along within this video. So I've got everything ready, and without further ado, we'll start with an overview of what this video will go through one by one. So the table of contents, basically. Sorry about that. Okay. There's basically going to be 5 chapters within this video. First video is establishing the goal of the community's standardized software mod. I'm going to scrutinize the standardized software mod quite heavily in this video. So I'm referring to UCF or 1.03, whatever you want to call it. Really, what I'm referring to here is just the mod that the community uses in general. And what I'm going to explain in this video is why the goal of this mod from the get-go, despite what people were told, is actually to modernize the game. Meaning, everything that the community was told in 2017 about controller equality, I'm going to explain why solving the controller lottery, stuff like that, that's not really the goal of the mod. The goal of the mod is actually simply to modernize the game. And pretty soon it'll make sense what I mean by that. Secondly, I'll be going over the internal discussions of 2017 and where they went wrong. So what I mean by that is there were behind-the-scenes discussions in 2017 which pertained to how this should be pitched to the public. And I was involved in these discussions, so I have some insight that will shed light into why the community thinks certain things today. It was all predetermined from 2017, basically, based on the way that some internal discussions went. So you'll see what I mean by that as well. Then I will give a review of the upcoming UCF 0.84, and I will compare it to my recommended 1.03. So I'll go into great detail about that. And then I will give what I consider to be the harsh truth about UCF. You'll see what I mean. I basically am of the opinion that UCF has hurt the game in more ways than people realized. That will make more sense after I review UCF 0.84. And then number 5, chapter 5, toward the end of the video, I will explain why box players should fully oppose the idea that nerfs, such as travel time nerfs, for example, are appropriate to give to their controller. So without further ado, I will explain what I mean right here when I say that the goal is game modernization, not controller equality. So on this slide, I explain that the number 1 rule for solving the controller crisis is establishing that Melee ought to be played on a modernization patch. This was already partially conceded back in 2017 when the agreement to fix dashback and shield drop was first made. That was when the community started to agree that we actually shouldn't be playing on vanilla. But there are some details that need to be clarified. The justification for fixing these mechanics, contrary to what people were told, mostly by the UCF team, is not to fix hardware disparities. It's not to fix hardware disparities. The justification is that there are actually 11 mechanics that simply don't behave as they logically should, meaning the competitive community, disparities or not, should fix these mechanics because they don't work properly. It's got nothing to do with the disparities, really. You can think of fixing the disparities as more of a byproduct rather than the goal itself. So here's what I mean by that. Dash forward is a perfectly functional mechanic. Why? Because it has a 2-frame window. Hardware disparities don't matter. For example, PODE doesn't matter. You'll always succeed your dash forward because it's coded properly as a 2-frame window. But dash back, on the other hand, is not a functional mechanic because its 1-frame window doesn't suffice. It doesn't suffice for that technique. It's luck on vanilla. You'll succeed at about 50% of the time. So the reason PODE matters here is because the mechanic suffers from a game design oversight. So the question here is, did we need hardware disparities to exist in order to justify fixing dashback? And the answer is no. And that's where the UCF team screwed up. That's where the UCF team misinformed the Melee community. People think that hardware disparities were necessary justification for fixing dashback and also shield drop when really that's not true. Moving on to the next slide, if you look at this, up top I've got a screenshot of 20XX, the ISO that Achilles made in 2014. And you can see right here that there is the option to change dashback to a 2-frame window. So back in 2014, PODE was really not well understood, but people like Achilles still understood that dashback should be 2 frames. So, like I say here, he knew that it should be 2 frames, and that's why he offered this option. But the problem is that back then, the community just completely shunned out the idea that the game ought to be modded, and so this type of mod was never going to become standard back in 2014. That was a mistake in retrospect. We know the game does need to be modded in some capacity, beyond any reasonable doubt. So here I offer some insight. I say, what could have happened in retrospect is the community could have actually tested this and realized that it's a no-brainer, and from there, we could have looked to continue looking for other faulty mechanics. We could have said, wow, fixing dashback was a great decision for the game. What if there are even more mechanics that we need to fix? And it just so happens that there are a lot of them. So what could have theoretically happened, and this would have been a good move for the game, would have been if the community worked together to create a mod called 1.03, where we say, there are actually a lot of uncompetitive mechanics in this game, and we should find all of them, and we should fix them. And likely the name for that would have been 1.03. I can't think of what else it would be called. So what I'm getting at here is that the point here is that a box doesn't exist yet. The box doesn't exist yet, meaning fixing these mechanics, regardless of the box, is good. And I'm going to the reason I'm clarifying that now is because there's a lot of stigma surrounding the box. People hate the box. They're like, Pax is only trying to propose 1.03 because of the box. Not true. I'm proposing 1.03 because it's a great move for the game. It's like I say here, it's something that we could have done a long time ago before the box was even a thing. But you see, it's got nothing to do with the box, and it's also got nothing to do with controller inconsistencies. It's just got to do with the fact that this is a game design oversight. The fact that dashback wasn't 2 frames to begin with. And so I suggest the possibility that this could have all happened a long time ago, but it didn't happen. When things did start to happen, meaning when things started to get moving, was when, on June 9th of 2017, I proposed on a video called the GameCube Controller Project, I proposed modifying certain mechanics. Meaning I said, guys, it actually really doesn't make sense for us to have be subject to all these problems with like dashback, shield drop, 1.0 cardinal. I was continuing to find mechanics like that, and there should definitely be a standardized patch for the game in which we reevaluate the way that these mechanics are actually coded. Now, this piqued the interest of people like PTAS right away. See, on June 12th, he reiterated something that I actually said on that video. I said that dashback is kind of like the equivalent of tripping in Brawl, but we just never really looked at it that way because we were so against software modding. He says something interesting here. He says, if we decide to act on dashback, we'll open a door to other long-needed fixes. He is absolutely right. That is definitely some foreshadowing in terms of where this was inevitably going to head. But anyway, see, that tweet was made on June 12th, and on that same exact day, I actually made a Discord group chat. And that Discord group chat contained a couple of people in it. One of them was Dan Salvato, and I say that I'm looking to turn my project into a memory card, because I realized that a memory card was the proper way to implement this. And so I needed the help of Salvato. But here's actually where things go south, is you see, I made that chat at 6:38 a.m. in the morning. Literally less than 1 hour later, at 7:27 a.m., Dan Salvato says, I still believe the best approach toward a conservative community is to take it one step at a time, where step one is to remove inconsistencies. And that's where I tell him that I'm not willing to take that route. I, at the time, was trying to find every single mechanic in the game. Every single one that was faulty. I was willing to continue doing the research and informing people as to what mechanics needed to be fixed, because there shouldn't have been a preference. Right here, he's basically implying that we just fix dashback and shield drop, like the ones people know about. But I refused to budge on that, and I kept scanning the game, and I found mechanics like dashback out of crouch and 1.0 cardinal. I knew about these two back in 2017. There happened to be a lot more mechanics than just this, but as you can see, I was taking the long-term approach. I wanted to find everything because on a software level, I knew that dashback and shield drop were not the only faulty mechanics. So now, I shouldn't have skipped straight to that slide. What I wanted to show you guys next is the UCF reveal video. So Dan Salvato and I end up not seeing eye to eye on this at all. And he goes ahead and he debuts UCF with the other UCF guys, which is basically like the ones that you see listed here. Now, when I saw this, I was very frustrated. Basically, I got excommunicated within the discussions, and they went and they did this without me. But the reason that I was frustrated was because I knew they created a huge problem with the way that they framed this to the community. So, in this trailer, they actually go to great lengths to tell people that they did not make the game easier. So you see how they have like a bicycle crossed out? They're basically saying that they did not make the game easier. And I think it explicitly says that somewhere. Yeah, right here. The focus of UCF is to turn any controller into a good controller without going beyond what's possible on vanilla. That is not true. This is actually false, what they are telling people on this video. And anyone who knows, like, from a technical perspective, what they're actually doing here would see that they're right here. They're telling you they increase the window of dashback. They increase the window of dashback and the range of shield drop. So you can't say right off the bat, you can't tell people that you didn't make the game easier when in actuality they did. But the problem is that this misconception infested the minds of everybody. It infested the minds of even like a top player like Armada. Here, I have it on this slide. Take a look at what he says here. Listen to what he says here.
But yeah, I personally just want to end this lottery. Like, you can buy many controllers, and they are most likely bad. And even if you get a pretty good one, the lifespan for them is not that high either. So it doesn't only become a lottery, it's also a much higher cost.
So they push this essentially as a solution to the lottery, which was not what it started out as at all. Like I said, solving the lottery, if we go back to what I was saying on one of the very first slides, solving the lottery is more of a byproduct. It's more of a byproduct. What you're actually doing is you're making the game functional. But that's not how they pitched it. They pitched it in a really misinformative way. So, problems that come to mind with their trailer, for one, they actually stigmatize. This is a big problem. They actually stigmatized fixing anything past dashback and shield drop. You can see that on their website as well. See that on their site. I'm trying to pull this up. Okay, so here they say most notoriously dashback and shield drop are what we needed to fix. But the problem with this, also let me just fix my OBS real fast. Sorry about that. Okay, there we go. The problem with this is there's no technical difference between dashback, shield drop, and the other 9 mechanics that ought to be fixed. They created a huge problem because there's eventually 9 other mechanics that you need to fix. They only fixed 2, and they practically stigmatized fixing the others. So they created a huge long-term problem. They also lied because they claim that the game is not being made easier when it is. And a comparison that I can think of is if a basketball hoop is 20 feet in the air, then the game is not designed properly. People can't make the ball reach that hoop. So the hoop should be lowered to 10, and that's a good thing, right? But that's not what the UCF teams suggested. They suggested that it's just bad to make the game easier, which is not true. Sometimes you do need to make the game easier so that it's designed correctly, and so it shouldn't carry that stigma. Then finally, another issue is that they push the idea that controller disparities are the reason that we need to fix these mechanics. That's not true either. Faulty game design is the only reason that we need to fix these mechanics. So overall, they created a lot of misconceptions that eventually would have to be undone in order to create the end game patch that the community needs. And I wrote about this in the Box Manifesto. I basically said, see if I can zoom in on this. Okay. Literally in the manifesto I wrote, they fixed 2 mechanics and then they closed their doors when we know that other mechanics like 1.0 Cardinal have problems. And they did this literally just because 1.0 Cardinal isn't in demand. But that doesn't make sense because the lack of demand is an arbitrary factor. It doesn't change the fact that that's a faulty mechanic in the game. So what they should have done is make an effort to educate people about, for example, 1.0 Cardinal and other mechanics. And then demand for them could have very well been there. But ultimately, demand or not, you have to fix whatever faulty mechanics are in the game. Once you start crossing this bridge, it doesn't matter if the mechanic is extremely urgent or not. You did create the implication that you're gonna create a fixed game version. So they shouldn't have only fixed 2 mechanics and then closed their doors, like I said up there. Then the other issue that I raised is basically that they lied. Basically, they said that UCF is just causing controllers to tie the theoretical best hardware. And on this next page, I explain in great detail why that's not true. The moment a mechanic is software modded like it is on UCF, it's better than what you were able to formerly have. Like, they increased shield drop's range, and they told people they didn't make shield drop easier. They increased dashback's window. They told people they didn't make it easier. This is so demonstrably untrue. And basically what I say here is what I've been trying to hammer home from the very beginning of this video, is that the essence of this mod isn't to tie the best hardware, it's to redesign mechanics that make it impossible to achieve equal performance through hardware. Meaning, you're modernizing mechanics. You are fixing the game in areas that the developers overlooked. And by telling people otherwise, you're creating a huge long-term problem. The long-term problem can be seen right here. 2017, Hungrybox, literally most powerful guy in the scene, says, no-brainer, guys, we need to use UCF. But it's not as much of a no-brainer as it would seem, because look, 5 years later, Hungrybox is now asking, why are box controllers not balanced? The reason box controllers aren't balanced is because UCF screwed up. That's ultimately why. And to further show the problem, Zane, I'm not trying to single out these people at all. These are all common sentiments, the ones that I'm showing. Top players in general think that the way to balance the box now would be to nerf it, when that is not true. Because the box already has all the in-game nerfs that it can be given. When I say in-game, I'm referring to in-game mechanic nerfs. Meaning, like, not travel time nerfs or anything like that. I'm talking about in terms of actual in-game capabilities within Melee, like techniques within the game. This is everything that you can give the box. But on the other hand, when you look at the full list of faulty mechanics that box automatically bypasses, look how long that list is. There's so much. There's all this. Shit. Didn't mean to do that. In a second. There we go. Okay, there's all this, right? Those are all the mechanics that if you plug in a box, automatically you're playing with, like, good versions of these, whereas the community's standardized software patch fixes hardly any of this. This is UCF 0.8, so this is showing what is currently fixed out of that full list on the community's standardized patch. Only dashback and wiggle are properly fixed, and then shield drop is not fully fixed because they didn't maximize the range in the way that they should. Something that I want to reiterate here is that regardless of the box, modernizing these mechanics, it's warranted. All of these mechanics, they should be fixed regardless because they don't actually work in competitive ways, but you could argue that the box forces the issue. It forces the issue in the sense that the modernization patch becomes necessary because you just legalized a controller that plugs in with all of this automatically, and there's no way to change that. All these mechanics are automatically good on box, whereas they're not on GameCube controller. So the box does kind of force the issue, but it would have been warranted and good for the game regardless, if that makes sense. Only exception is increased timing window on dash at a crouch, which I listed right here. The box does not plug in with this. That's something I'll get to later. That's the only mechanic that the box does not plug in with, and so by fixing this, you actually improve the box as well. I'll get to that later in the video. But to show you what the community is playing on right now, look how much is left out. All the ones that are faded out are not currently fixed. So the community's modernization patch is far from complete. Remember, it's a modernization patch. It's not a hardware disparities fixer or anything like that. That's the number one misconception. Now, that brings me to UCF 0.84. UCF 0.84, they did finally update it. All these years later, they did finally announce an update on December 23rd, 2022. And now we're going to move to the next chapter of the video, which is going to be the UCF 0.84 review, and why it's sadly not the solution that the community is looking for. I will go through every mod that they've done. You have 1.0 Cardinal, dash at crouch, SDI, shield SDI, and shield drop. I've also listed, I've created like a similar organization right here to show you what the new list looks like. As you can see, it's still very far from complete. What they've changed is they got this one right, just to preview what we're going to be going over. This one is good. Smash DI on frame 2 hit lag, that's good. Dash out of crouch Y, that's good. Shield drop, okay, I'm going to explain why the way they did shield drop actually should be banned. Meaning, they did something on the shield drop mod that should get UCF 0.84 completely repealed. It shouldn't even be allowed to standardize this, and I'll explain. I'll explain when we get to that. 1.0 Cardinal, they partially fixed it. So as you can see, there's an issue with the way that they're doing the range fixes, and I'll explain what that is. But anyway, okay, let's see. Okay, there we go. So, this is the shield drop fix that they did. I've actually listed UCF 0.84 on the left and 1.03 on the right. So as you can see, 1.03, that is giving you a maximized range all the way downward, which is that's the way you should do it. UCF 0.84, on the other hand, here's what they're doing. Let me zoom in. They increased shield drop upward by 4 values. Now, the reason they did this is explained in the patch notes. They did this so that it can trigger on a high notch. You see that? They increased it up so that it triggers on a high notch. But now here's the crazy thing is you shouldn't be allowed to do that because it will change the actuation point. But they know this, and so they compensated for it with a timing delay. I'm not even joking. They compensated for it by saying that the shield drop has a 1 frame delay if you're using these values. It only works on the 2nd frame. That's ridiculous. That's insane for a lot of reasons. So, this yellow range that they introduced activates on the 2nd frame. Let me explain why this is ridiculous. For one, it's not even viable. I mean, it's like, I guess viable, but you shouldn't use it. Because this is going to actuate later than the green range. It's going to actuate, like, the plus 1 frame is going to cause it to take longer for you to shield drop than the green range would. Which means they didn't even introduce any viable coordinates. Because if you're a competitive player, you shouldn't use the new coordinates that they gave you because they have a 1 frame delay. But now I can think of how this is even crazier because think about the implications that it creates. So here I'm describing the implications. So if we can do this, if we can increase shield drop up and then say that's fine because we gave it a 1 frame delay. If we can do this, then who's to say that we can't increase the range all the way up? And then say, let's just delay that by like 2 or 3 frames to make it fine, right? Because they introduced another arbitrary value here. They increased it up by 4 values, which is arbitrary. And then they said that's fine because we gave it a 1 frame delay. Who's to say we can't go all the way up and say, oh, we'll just compensate for that with a 3 frame delay. I mean, think about how many implications this creates. They introduced a literal timing macro because they know that what they did here shouldn't have been legal. That you shouldn't be allowed to increase it up because it changes the actuation point. But then you introduce a timing macro to compensate. That's bizarre. The other issue that I have with all of this is that the whole thing that they were looking to achieve by increasing the range up is making it so that notches that are like a little higher, like right around here, are accommodated. But these notches are actually accommodated by the range, the additional range that you get by increasing it all the way downwards, because you can just overshoot. Meaning, you don't even need a notch. If this is your range, then it doesn't matter if the notch is right here. You can literally just jam the stick down brainlessly and you'll get the shield drop. So it's actually the proper way to address the problem with notches that are here is you just jam the stick all the way down. So yeah, all in all, this is the worst fix overall on UCF 0.84. The next fix is the 1.0 cardinal fix. 1.0 cardinal, they increased it by 6 values. I'll zoom in so people can see that. So that's what the 6 value increase looks like. Now, this is good. Don't get me wrong. It's going to help your ability to pinpoint 1.0 cardinal, but it's still not correctly fixed, really. If you look at this slide, I basically explain why there's a questionable design choice here. There's a very disagreeable design choice. If you notice right there, in the center, there's a 0.9875 coordinate right there. And then that gets surrounded by 1.0, but then it goes back to 0.9875. Now, aesthetically, that doesn't really make sense. Compared to, see. I think I forgot this one slide on the preparation. So let me just show you all here. Yeah, okay. So it doesn't make sense to do that rather than causing it to stay at 1.0, as you can see on this diagram. It should just stay on 1.0 once the transition happens. If we were to redesign the game, I mean, this is like very shoddy. This is not how a game designer would develop it with the way that it goes to 1.0 and then back to 0.9875. It should by all means just remain there. They're introducing even more arbitrary values as well by saying that it's just a 6 value cutoff. I mean, where's the rationale there? Why not 7? Why not 8? Something that I understand that they've argued is that they want to preserve some 0.9875 for the characters that have magnitude-based up Bs, like Sheik and Zelda, for example, or Pikachu. They have magnitude-based up Bs, meaning if you want to go 1% less on your up B, then you can preserve this range. But that's pretty ridiculous because even for those characters, like I listed that here. How the benefit of this is that if you're playing one of those characters, then it preserves some 0.9875 for you, so you can do like a 1% less up B intentionally. But the pros are so outweighed by the cons because 21 of the characters in the game don't have magnitude-based up Bs, and so those characters are just strictly hurt by this. And then even for the 5 that do, it's better overall for 1.0 to be maxed, like it is here. It's better overall, even if you're playing Sheik or Pikachu. It's better for 1.0 to look like this, because things like horizontal movement speed are way more important than being able to go 1% less on your up B. And then one last thing I can think of is that maximizing 1.0 is more logically consistent with maximizing shield drop. I think I forgot the slide for this one as well, but let me just quickly pull one up of what I'm trying to say. Give me a second for this one. Yeah, so right there, that's logically consistent. I did 1.0 a little differently on this diagram. This is actually more correct because of the way that clamping works. I should have done it like this on the other diagram. But nonetheless, you get the point. Maximizing both in all of the legal directions is the less arbitrary design, whereas they're literally causing 0.9875 to change to 1.0 and then back to 0.9875. That doesn't really make sense from an aesthetic perspective. So this is a disagreeable fix as well. Moving on, I'll go over their dash out of crouch fix. Their dash out of crouch fix is only addressing the less important component of dash out of crouch, which is the fact that there are these 3 coordinates that you have to cross unfairly. On a GameCube controller, you have to cross these coordinates. They should absolutely be addressed. And so they're fixing that, but that only helps you microscopically. It doesn't help you by much to address that, because the bigger problem with dash out of crouch by far is that it needs a 3-frame window. That's because of its curved travel route. The 2-frame window actually doesn't suffice. And people subconsciously know this, which is why the Goom Wave offered a dash back out of crouch toggle. The Goom Wave, this shouldn't have been legal for one controller to do this, like hardware side. But that is why they offer a dash back out of crouch toggle, because it is acknowledged as a faulty mechanic because of this issue that it has, where the curved travel route makes it so the 2-frame window doesn't suffice. Now, some people argue against changing it to 3 frames, but I want to present my argument in favor of it. Over here, I basically explained that there's a hierarchy of dash mechanics. So on vanilla, as I said at the beginning of the video, dash forward is the only one that's good. It's the only one that's designed properly. It's got a 100% success rate. You'll always succeed it with a 2-frame window, so you're good there. Dash back out of crouch is actually second on the hierarchy. Let's say 75% success rate with its issues on vanilla melee. Dash back is the worst one. Dash back is like 50% success. So it's awful. It's like unusable on vanilla. But then on UCF, this is an angle that people don't really consider, is that they actually disrupted the hierarchy. They gave dashback a plus like 50% fix, but they left dashback out of crouch unfixed. So what I'm trying to get at here, and I should have written this down, is that the UCF hierarchy arbitrarily benefits certain characters. For example, Marth would prefer for only dash back to be fixed. This gives him a better matchup against, let's say, Sheik and Falcon, who would benefit from dash back out of crouch. So you see, it's less arbitrary to fix all 3 of them at that point. You basically disrupted the hierarchy by only fixing dash back because you awkwardly left dash back out of crouch, behind. But people didn't really look at it this way, because dash back by all means is like the mechanic that you kind of have to fix for melee to be playable. Some people didn't even know that dash back out of crouch was a different mechanic until like pretty recently. But when you think of it this way, the UCF hierarchy is incomplete. The 1.03 hierarchy of all the dash mechanics being fixed, that's the modernized hierarchy. So that's my disagreement with what they did, or didn't do, I should say, is they didn't address the fact that the 3-frame window is needed. And then finally, what I'm showing here is Smash DI. So they addressed the hit lag issue with SDI, but they did not address the remainder issue. The remainder issue refers to the fact that you can get an early pull that can stifle your SDI magnitude. And this can actually cheat you out of escaping situations such as jab resets and slide offs, which I will show a quick clip of so that people can see that if you don't have the remainder fix states that you get the remainder, meaning your magnitude will always end up being 1.0. It'll always be consistent. You can actually get cheated out of escaping situations like jab resets and slide offs unfairly. And so, to fully recap UCF 0.84 in terms of the four mechanics that they addressed, the shield drop fix, okay, really it's like, these two should be orange. Shield drop the shield drop fix straight up should not be legal. It straight up should not be legal mainly because they actually added, I think, the macro. That's crazy. They changed the actuation point, then they basically acknowledged that shouldn't have been legal, so they added a macro to compensate. This is crazy. This should actually get the whole thing repealed, if I'm being honest with you. They should not be allowed to code that into the game. 1.0 Cardinal, I put it in yellow because it's the least problematic of the fixes that we went over. I don't agree with it. To recap why I don't agree, it should have been this. It should have been maxed. Logically consistent design, right? It shouldn't have been what they did. But it is, whoops, here we go. It is the least problematic of the four they added, so, I've got it in yellow. Then, dash out of crouch, I strongly encourage for the third frame to be tested, because this one went overlooked for a long time. It's by all means a dysfunctional mechanic, even though it is a special case, right? Like I said, it's actually the only faulty mechanic that the box doesn't automatically plug in with a fixed version of. But nonetheless, I did give the reasoning, the justification for it. That being the fact that the hierarchy on UCF is arbitrary. Dashes in general are like the most core movement option in the game. They should be properly functional. And so, if the third frame is not added, then the incentive to jam your stick on dash back out of crouch is absolutely still there. So the dash out of crouch Y fix that they're adding, this is hardly going to do anything on its own. Almost nothing really. The third frame is what's important. And then SDI, I basically explained that they're not giving you the remainder fix, which is the more important component of the SDI fix. And so I don't agree with this fix either. So in summary, you can see how they've created this useless middle ground, basically, where three of the mechanics, well, really all four of them have problems. Point is, it's not the end game solution. It's a pointless middle ground, and it remains overly conservative. Problem with UCF from the start, that it was too conservative. UCF 0.84, it's still too conservative. 6 years have passed, and we know what the full list of faulty mechanics is. So why would we create a middle ground? Doesn't make sense. Now, this is chapter 4 of the video. This is like what I consider to be the truth about UCF overall and how it hurt the game, which I do have to put bluntly at this point. Because what happened was, in 2017, I consulted Dan Salvato only with the intention of getting my mod converted to a memory card, not with the intention of creative direction being changed. But creative direction got seized almost immediately. They rehash it as a controller equalizer. They only fixed 2 mechanics. And then I'm like, oh, we're screwed. We're absolutely screwed because they didn't go the full way. They didn't really teach people what the mod was supposed to be. And so now, a lot of people regurgitated what they were told by UCF back then, and now the community kind of doesn't understand that the goal from the very start was to create a modernized game version. And yes, that creates parity with the box in the process, but that's not really the justification for this. Justification is simply that these mechanics aren't competitive. These mechanics aren't competitive, and so the competitive community ought to fix them. But now, with the box in the picture, it kind of forces the issue, like I said, like I say here, the box forces the issue. You don't really have a choice but to fix them anymore because there's a controller archetype that automatically has them fixed, but you should have fixed them regardless. It's good for the game to fix them. Now, the problem here is that the UCF team, essentially, they're conceding that my approach from the very start was right by creating the middle ground between UCF 0.8 and 1.03. They are conceding this, right? Like I showed you, they created a middle ground. Now the question is, why did it take 6 years? Why did it take 6 years to concede that? For example, in the box manifesto, which I showed pretty early on in the video, literally, okay, let's see. Yeah. I say, why is 1.0 Cardinal not included? That was 2018. That's 5 years ago. So it took them 5 years to address 1.0 Cardinal, and they didn't address it correctly. It's too conservative. There's, the bottom line is that the middle ground is pointless. They should go the full way. They're being overly conservative, and they're kind of holding the mod hostage. The point is that they shouldn't have seized creative direction. I consulted, I showed how I consulted Salvato only to convert this to a memory card, but right away, creative direction was seized, and that's what sent the entire game down this path, was that internal discussion that we had on June 12th of 2017, where Salvato basically says that he's only open to doing a conservative mod, and now here we are. The conservative mod wasn't the correct approach. Finally, I must emphasize that the box community should fully object to some of the nerfs that are being proposed. So, as I say here, box players and manufacturers should fully object to the idea that some of the nerfs that have been proposed are warranted. If any manufacturer were to distribute any type of mod that contains, let's say, travel time nerfs, it would be a concession to peer pressure. This is, I strongly encourage for no one to actually create patches with, let's say, a travel time nerf. It would be succumbing. It would be succumbing to an uneducated viewpoint. And I mean, I want to add this. It's like, basically what I'm saying is, I'm not going to type it out. Basically what I'm saying is that the mob is uneducated. The mob is uneducated, period. The box community should not even entertain this because it's not the correct step. The correct step should be equality between game mechanics, meaning standardize the modernized game version. And UCF 0.84, which is basically partial equality, UCF 0.84 is it's like a middle ground, and then people are suggesting pairing that with box nerfs. That doesn't make sense because you haven't even completed the modernization patch. What should be standardized is everything on the right, the full thing with no concessions. If you standardize this, then people are like, oh, why is the box still better? The reason it's still better is because some of these mechanics that are being excluded are huge. Vertical throws is huge. SDI remainder fix, meaning the full SDI fix, is huge. ADT shield is huge. Oh, that brings me to another clip that I wanted to show. Take a look at this. Hold on. Okay. Take a look at this. This is an example of where it's important to educate people. Just to show them how important these less well-known mechanics are. So, Moki versus Cody, which just happened a week ago. Look at what happens in this interaction toward the very end of the set. Moki's going to go for a dash attack. Just pay close attention to what happens. ADT shield. Anyone see that? Play it again. Okay, watch the dash attack and watch for the shield animation. That's an ADT shield. Saw how the shield came up, right? This arguably wins him the set, because now Cody's got to get it from ledge and he fucks up. That arguably won Moki the set, but you're never going to hear people talk about that. You're never going to hear people talk about that. That's an example of where one of these less well-known mechanics actually completely decided the set. So that's what actually needs to be. That's what needs to be addressed. Then the last thing that I want to reemphasize is that there shouldn't be any type of stigma when it comes to modernizing these mechanics, because, as I've said throughout the video, regardless of the box, they ought to be fixed. They're not competitive. The vanilla version of the game's got a lot of problems with its mechanics, and so people should be open to trying the fixed versions out. It's like, for the same reasons that fixing dashback and shield drop was good, fixing the rest of the mechanics is great too. So I think, with that being said, closing thoughts. Let's see. It would probably be best for the New York community to test 1.03 at Nightclub at some point, since this tournament gets a lot of entrance / visibility. And then don't distribute or comply with the travel time nerf idea. The idea of UCF 0.84 plus box nerfs will only cause long-term harm. Like, even distributing the code for that, it would just end up getting repealed. It wouldn't actually do any good. It would just get repealed, because, like, if 1.03 got tested later, then people would say, alright, well, why did we nerf the box? Why did this software even get distributed? So, yeah, I guess those are just some closing thoughts. But in general, this all requires a reevaluation of what the mod was supposed to do from the get-go. And believe it or not, it really was this interaction right here between me and Salvato, where he encourages the conservative approach, and I say, no way. I'm like, no way. That's not gonna provide us with the end game solution that we need. This was what swung things, because then UCF comes out, like the initial version of UCF comes out, and everything gets screwed up from there. Everything, including the way that people perceive what these mods were supposed to do from the very start. And so there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that has to be undone in order for this discussion to move. That being said, hope this was an informative video. Probably my last video on the subject, since I think I've covered everything that needs to be said. Make sure to leave your thoughts in the comment section. And I look forward to hearing feedback. All right. Thanks for watching.